Section 1. Before the numbers arrived. June 12, 1943, Tokyo, Naval General Staff Headquarters. The room is silent. A naval intelligence officer stands rigid at the far end of the long conference table, both hands gripping a freshly decoded report from Washington. Sweat beads on his forehead, despite the summer breeze drifting in from Tokyo Bay through tall, narrow windows. Across from him sit the admirals of the Imperial Japanese Navy, men who had planned Pearl Harbor, men who believed they had shattered the backbone of the United States Navy in a single morning. Gentlemen, his voice tightens. These are the number of American aircraft carriers launched this year alone. The papers slide onto the polished wooden table. No one laughs. No one scoffs. No one speaks. One admiral slowly removes his glasses, studies the figures, then looks again, as if the numbers might change if stared at long enough. A pencil rolls gently across the table and taps against a wall map of the Pacific. Outside, a ship's horn echoes across Tokyo Bay. On the far side of this ocean, hundreds of thousands of American workers are laboring day and night beneath industrial floodlights, and massive steel hulls are slipping into the water faster than Japan can sink them. In this quiet room, in this single moment, the Imperial Japanese Navy begins to grasp a terrifying truth. This war is no longer a naval contest alone. It has become a war of numbers. But to understand why that realization cuts so deeply, we must return to a time when Japanese officers openly mocked the very idea. December 7, 1941, Tokyo Bay. The harbor lies calm beneath a pale winter sun. Battleships sit anchored in perfect order, their gray hulls reflected in the still water. Inside the Navy Ministry, the air smells of ink, tobacco smoke, and certainty. Pearl Harbor has been attacked. Reports pour in confirming what Japanese planners had dreamed of for decades. American battleships sunk at anchor, aircraft destroyed on the ground, the Pacific Fleet crippled before it can respond. In briefing rooms across Tokyo, confidence reigns. When the subject of American shipbuilding arises, the tone turns dismissive. U.S. shipyards, officers insist, are slow and civilian-run, plagued by labor disputes, inefficiency, and a lack of centralized discipline. Japan's navy is built by specialists, craftsmen, and tightly controlled arsenals. America builds refrigerators and automobiles. Aircraft carriers, the most complex warships ever constructed, require years to complete. Pearl Harbor, they believe, has bought Japan the one thing it needs most: time. A young staff officer records in his journal, "America has factories, we have discipline." The belief seems unshakable. Japanese naval doctrine rests on decisive battles, not prolonged industrial wars. The United States, sprawling and democratic, appears incapable of responding quickly enough to matter. Across the Pacific, however, the reaction could not be more different. In American shipyards stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific, floodlights blaze through the night, welding arcs flash like lightning against unfinished hulls, schedules are rewritten, budgets discarded, and peacetime rules erased. This is no longer production, it is mobilization. In late December 1941, a U.S. Navy lieutenant commander walks the length of a half-completed carrier hull on the West Coast. Chalkboards list components, turbines, elevators, radar arrays, each assigned delivery dates measured not in months but weeks. The system itself is being redesigned, yet none of this reaches Tokyo in time. Japanese intelligence remains focused on American losses, not American capacity. Early Pacific victories reinforce the illusion. Wake Island, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies. Then, in May 1942, the illusion cracks. The Battle of the Coral Sea introduces a new kind of naval warfare. Carriers fighting beyond visual range. Japan loses the carrier Shoho. More critically, Shokaku is damaged, and Zuikaku loses too many aircraft to fight again immediately. Still, planners insist the balance favors Japan. 1 month later, Midway proves them catastrophically wrong. On June 4, 1942, 4 Japanese fleet carriers burn and sink in a single day. Decades of preparation vanish beneath the Pacific. The loss is staggering, but even then, the deeper danger is missed. Japanese officers tell themselves America has suffered too. Yorktown is gone. The Pacific is vast. Time remains. What they do not yet see are the figures quietly crossing desks in Washington, and soon, encrypted cables bound for Tokyo. By the summer of 1942, new American keels are already being laid, designs standardized, lessons from Midway folded directly into blueprints before the ink dries. When the first production summaries reach Japanese intelligence, they are dismissed as exaggeration. Then more arrive, and more. Keel-laying dates, launch schedules, yard capacities. A junior analyst circles a single line on a report again and again. Fleet carrier, estimated completion under 2 years. Then another, then another. Mockery fades, doubt creeps in. Because if these numbers are even partially true, then Pearl Harbor did not buy time at all. It started a clock Japan will never be able to stop. Section 2. The illusion of superiority. By the autumn of 1942, the numbers arriving in Tokyo are no longer isolated reports. They form patterns. Inside the Naval Intelligence Bureau, analysts pin new sheets beside old ones, lining production figures against ship losses, dates against distances. At first glance, the math seems abstract. Columns of tonnage, hull classifications, projected completion dates. But beneath the ink lies a brutal implication. America is not rebuilding. America is accelerating. Yet among senior Imperial Japanese Navy officers, confidence still lingers. The belief is deeply ingrained. Naval wars are decided by skill, doctrine, and decisive engagements, not factories. Japan has proven this again and again. At Tsushima, at Pearl Harbor, at every early clash in the Pacific. The American Navy, they argue, may replace ships eventually, but not crews. Not experience, not spirit. In wardrooms and strategy sessions, officers continue to speak of qualitative superiority. Japanese pilots train longer, Japanese torpedoes run farther, Japanese night fighting doctrine remains unmatched. Numbers alone, they insist, cannot win battles. But while doctrine dominates discussion in Tokyo, something far more dangerous is unfolding quietly across the ocean. In American shipyards, war production has shed every remaining trace of peacetime thinking. The old method, building a ship from keel to mast in a single yard, is being abandoned. In its place emerges a radical idea borrowed from automobile manufacturing: modular construction. Hull sections are fabricated hundreds of miles apart, engine rooms assembled inland, superstructures welded together like massive steel blocks. Components arrive by rail and truck, timed to the hour, sliding into place with mechanical precision. A carrier is no longer a single ship, it is a system. At one West Coast yard, a foreman watches as 2 massive hull sections are lowered into position by cranes operating in tandem. Sparks fly as welders seal the seam. The sound is deafening. Steel meeting steel, progress measured in inches per minute. What once took years is now measured in months. What once required custom craftsmanship is now standardized. American engineers do not chase perfection, they chase output. By early 1943, this philosophy begins to manifest at sea. Japanese submarines report encountering unfamiliar silhouettes, carriers with different profiles, new escort formations, destroyers appearing in numbers that defy expectation. After-action reports mention replacement units arriving with unsettling speed. Ships lost 1 month seem to reappear the next. In Tokyo, the intelligence summaries grow thicker, more urgent, more troubling. One internal report notes that American carrier task forces appear to absorb losses without altering operational tempo. Another warns that U.S. shipyard capacity has not yet peaked. The phrase industrial depth begins appearing in memoranda. It is not a compliment. The shock deepens when analysts compare timelines. Japan's carriers lost at Midway, gone forever. America's carriers lost in 1942, already replaced or in the process of being replaced before the year ends. This is the moment when the illusion of parity begins to fracture, not in battle. On paper, a mid-ranking officer in the Navy Ministry scribbles a note in the margin of a report. Even total victory in one engagement may not alter the balance. It is an extraordinary admission. For the first time, Japanese planners are forced to confront an idea that runs counter to everything their doctrine has taught them. That skill without replacement is fragile. That bravery without industry is finite. That winning battles may no longer decide wars. Still, no one dares say it aloud. Not yet. Because admitting the truth would mean accepting something far worse than defeat. It would mean accepting inevitability. Section 3. Midway's Aftermath and the Math of Attrition. By early 1943, the Pacific War no longer feels the same to those planning it in Tokyo. Maps still cover the walls. Colored pins still mark fleet positions. But now, beside every red marker denoting an American loss, there is an unspoken question no one wants to ask. How long until it comes back? The aftermath of Midway hangs over every discussion like a shadow. 4 fleet carriers lost in a single day. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, ships that had taken years to design, build, and train crews for. Their air groups, some of the most experienced naval aviators in the world, vanished with them. Japan tries to replace them. Plans are drawn up to convert merchant hulls into carriers. Existing designs are modified, stretched, adapted. But every proposal runs into the same wall. Time, steel allocations are limited, skilled labor is finite, fuel shortages begin to creep into training schedules. An aircraft carrier without trained pilots is only a floating deck, and pilots take years. Across the ocean, the United States approaches the same problem from a completely different direction. After Midway, American naval planners do not pause to mourn losses, they rewrite schedules. They accelerate programs already in motion. The Essex-class carriers, larger, more standardized, designed for mass production, move from blueprint to hull with relentless speed. Shipyards operate on rotating shifts 24 hours a day. When one crew clocks out, another steps into the same weld seams, the same scaffolding, the same half-finished compartments. There is no reset. There is only continuation. By mid-1943, Japanese intelligence officers begin tracking an alarming trend. American carrier strength is not merely recovering, it is expanding. Task forces appear with 3, 4, sometimes 5 carriers operating together. Losses no longer thin formations. They are absorbed. Japanese submarine commanders report sinking escort carriers, only to encounter new ones weeks later. Aircrews note unfamiliar aircraft types appearing faster than recognition manuals can be updated. The numbers no longer make sense. In Tokyo, the arithmetic becomes unavoidable. One internal estimate calculates that even if Japanese forces achieve favorable exchange ratios, sinking more American ships than they lose, the United States will still emerge stronger month by month. The industrial base simply refills the ledger faster than Japan can subtract from it. Attrition, once a weapon Japan believed it could wield skillfully, has turned against them. A senior staff officer voices the concern during a closed briefing. Our victories no longer reduce the enemy's strength, they only delay its arrival. Silence follows. The statement is not challenged. By late 1943, the reality begins to bleed into operational decisions. Commanders are urged to conserve strength, risk calculations shift. Engagements once considered decisive are now weighed against replacement schedules. This is not how the Imperial Japanese Navy was designed to fight. Its doctrine depends on a single climactic battle, a crushing blow that would force the enemy to negotiate. But now, even that concept feels outdated. What does a decisive victory mean against an opponent who replaces losses as a matter of routine? In American shipyards, no one is asking that question. There, the war is measured in throughput. Carriers slide down the ways to cheers and whistles. Their names are recorded, their commissioning dates penciled into future operations. Before one is finished, another hull is already taking shape in the same dock. The war for the United States has become predictable. For Japan, it has become uncontrollable. And somewhere within the Naval General Staff, an unthinkable realization begins to take form. Still unspoken, but increasingly impossible to ignore. That the outcome of this war may already be determined, not by tactics, not by courage, but by the relentless mathematics of production. Section 4. When intelligence could no longer ignore reality. By the winter of 1943, denial inside the Imperial Japanese Navy becomes harder to maintain. The reports are no longer fragmentary. They arrive regularly now. Intelligence summaries compiled from submarine sightings, radio intercepts, aerial reconnaissance, and neutral diplomatic channels. Each one adds weight to the same conclusion. American shipbuilding has not peaked. It is still climbing. In Tokyo, analysts assemble charts comparing projected U.S. carrier strength against Japan's remaining fleet. The lines diverge sharply. One climbs, the other flattens, then begins to fall. A young intelligence officer pauses over a table showing U.S. carrier launches month by month. He recalculates the figures by hand, then again. The result does not change. Even if Japan loses nothing for the rest of the year, an impossibility, the Americans will still outnumber them. For the first time, Japanese intelligence stops asking how many ships the enemy has lost. They begin asking how many ships the enemy can lose. That question has no comforting answer. Inside operational planning meetings, tension grows. Admirals argue over strategy, over allocation of resources, over which theaters deserve priority. Some call for a decisive engagement to shatter American morale. Others urge caution, conservation, delay. But behind every argument lurks the same fear: delay only helps the enemy. American carrier groups now appear in places Japanese planners believed unreachable so soon. New task forces operate with unfamiliar confidence, supported by swarms of destroyers and replenishment ships that allow them to stay at sea longer than expected. The Americans are no longer reacting, they are advancing. Japanese pilots returning from combat report being outnumbered not occasionally, but consistently. Radar-directed fighters meet them before targets are even sighted. Anti-aircraft fire grows denser, more coordinated. Losses mount, not catastrophically, but steadily. And unlike before, those losses are not replaced. Fuel shortages reduce flight training hours. Veteran pilots are sent into combat repeatedly, their experience invaluable but irreplaceable. New pilots arrive with fewer hours, fewer carrier landings, less margin for error. An aircraft crashes on deck during a night landing. The deck crew clears the wreckage quickly, but everyone watching understands what has been lost. Time. Across the Pacific, time is exactly what America has. Shipyards continue to operate at a tempo Japanese planners can barely comprehend. Standardized designs mean spare parts fit multiple hulls. Damage that once would sideline a carrier for months is now repaired in weeks. Even intelligence officers hardened by years of war begin to use language once unthinkable. One report concludes bluntly, "Enemy naval strength appears functionally inexhaustible." The phrase circulates quietly. It is not included in public briefings, but it is read and understood. The mockery that once accompanied discussions of American industry has vanished entirely. In its place is something colder, a professional acknowledgement of an adversary whose power does not depend on brilliance, but on scale, a scale Japan cannot match. By early 1944, the implications begin to shape strategy at the highest levels. Defensive perimeters are reconsidered. Operations are scaled back. Risk is no longer something to be embraced, it is something to be managed. This shift does not mean surrender, but it does mean the war is no longer being fought with illusions. And as American production continues to flood the Pacific with steel, aircraft, and fuel, Japanese commanders face a grim truth. They are no longer fighting an enemy they can exhaust. They are fighting a process. Section 5. The enemy that could not be worn down. By mid-1944, the war confronting Japanese naval commanders no longer resembles the one they planned for. There is no single American fleet to destroy. No decisive formation whose annihilation would force negotiation. Instead, the enemy appears in waves, rotating, replenishing, expanding, each one stronger than the last. American carrier task forces now operate as instruments of routine pressure rather than gambles. One group withdraws for refit, another takes its place without pause. Bombardments continue. Amphibious landings follow. Airfields appear on islands once considered unreachable. For Japanese planners, the most unsettling aspect is not the scale of American operations. It is their predictability. Losses no longer interrupt tempo. A carrier damaged by air attack leaves the line, and another arrives. Aircraft shot down are replaced by squadrons trained months earlier. Pilots killed in action are replaced by men already queued in training pipelines that stretch back across the continental United States. This is not improvisation, it is design. Within the Naval General Staff, a new kind of briefing becomes common. Instead of discussing enemy intentions, officers analyze enemy capacity. Charts track production curves, training output, fuel availability, and repair timelines. The conclusion is always the same. Even success does not change the balance. A Japanese carrier division commander, reviewing post-battle assessments after a hard-fought engagement, notes that American losses were significant. Dozens of aircraft destroyed, multiple ships damaged. Yet 2 weeks later, reconnaissance reports show the same number of American carriers operating in the area. The damage has already been absorbed. For Japan, the same losses would have taken months or years to recover. Fuel shortages now dictate operations more than strategy. Training sorties are cut back to conserve aviation gasoline. Carrier pilots land with less practice, less confidence. Maintenance crews cannibalize parts from damaged aircraft to keep others flying. Each decision trades the future for the present, and the present grows shorter by the day. Meanwhile, American shipyards continue to launch carriers at a pace that defies earlier assumptions. Escort carriers roll off production lines in numbers sufficient to blanket convoys with air cover. Fleet carriers arrive with improved flight decks, better damage control, stronger anti-aircraft defenses. The Americans are learning and applying lessons faster than Japan can respond. A senior Japanese officer writes privately, "We destroy their ships, yet their strength increases. We preserve ours, yet our strength declines." The war has inverted. Attrition, once Japan's tool against China and expected to be wielded carefully against the United States, has become an American weapon. Slow, methodical, unstoppable. No dramatic breakthrough is required. No perfect battle plan. Only time. And time now belongs entirely to the United States. Japanese commanders still fight with skill, courage, and discipline. Battles are contested fiercely. Sacrifice is unquestioned. But beneath every operation lies the same unspoken awareness. Even victory no longer brings relief. It only delays the inevitable arrival of the next American fleet. Section 6. The moment the arithmetic turned fatal. By late 1944, the war has become an exercise in grim calculation for Japanese naval planners. Operations are no longer proposed with the question, "Can we win?" They are weighed against, "How long can we survive the loss?" Each carrier sortie, each air operation, each engagement is evaluated not by tactical promise, but by what it will cost in pilots, fuel, and aircraft, resources that can no longer be replaced at any meaningful rate. The Americans, meanwhile, continue to expand. New carrier groups arrive in the Pacific already fully integrated, crews trained together, air wings drilled in coordinated strikes, logistics units practiced in sustaining prolonged operations. These formations do not need time to mature. They arrive ready. For Japanese intelligence officers, this is perhaps the most demoralizing development of all. Earlier in the war, American units were thought to rely on trial and error, learning painfully in combat. Now, they arrive seasoned. Their experience accumulated in training fields thousands of miles away, rehearsed again and again before ever facing the enemy. The system has closed the loop. Combat lessons are transmitted back across the ocean, incorporated into doctrine, production, and training, then returned to the front embodied in new ships and new crews. Japan has no equivalent mechanism. By this stage, even optimistic projections fail to offer hope. Staff estimates show that by the end of 1945, American carrier strength will exceed anything Japan could have imagined in 1941. Even if the war had gone perfectly for the empire, it hasn't. Each new American offensive compresses Japan's defensive perimeter. Islands once dismissed as stepping stones now host airfields that extend American reach deeper into the Pacific. Supply lines grow more fragile, losses become harder to hide even from internal audiences. In planning sessions, silence stretches longer between comments. Officers stare at maps without speaking. No one needs to explain what the numbers mean anymore. They all understand. A mid-level planner writes in his notebook after a late-night briefing, "Our enemy does not need genius. They do not need miracles. They need only to continue." It is an admission stripped of emotion. The realization spreads quietly, not as panic, but as resignation. Japan is not being defeated by a single battle or commander. It is being overtaken. Overtaken by an industrial rhythm that cannot be disrupted, a tempo that cannot be matched, and a replacement cycle that renders sacrifice strategically meaningless. In earlier wars, bravery could compensate for weakness, surprise could overturn imbalance, skill could overcome odds. Here, none of that is enough. The arithmetic has turned fatal, and every day the war continues, the equation grows more lopsided. Section 7. Acceptance without surrender. By early 1945, the understanding within the Imperial Japanese Navy is complete, even if it is never spoken aloud in public. There is no dramatic meeting, no single report that changes everything. Instead, acceptance arrives the way exhaustion does, quietly, gradually, and without ceremony. Senior officers stop proposing bold counteroffensives. Planning documents grow defensive in tone. Operations are framed as delays rather than victories. The language shifts subtly but unmistakably. Attritional opportunity becomes time gained. Decisive engagement becomes acceptable loss. Victory disappears altogether. The American fleet now dominates the Pacific with a density that would have been unimaginable in 1941. Carrier task forces overlap in coverage. Escort carriers fill the gaps. Amphibious operations unfold under constant air protection, supported by logistics chains that stretch unbroken back to the U.S. mainland. Japanese reconnaissance flights return with the same report again and again: more ships, more aircraft, more fuel, always more. At this stage, Japanese commanders no longer ask whether American losses matter. They know they do not. A carrier sunk today represents months of effort for Japan and weeks for the United States. A lost pilot is a tragedy that cannot be replaced. An American pilot lost is a statistic already accounted for in training schedules drawn up years earlier. The imbalance is now structural. Even so, the Imperial Japanese Navy continues to fight, not because it believes it can reverse the tide, but because it has no alternative. Orders are followed. Sorties are flown. Ships sail knowing they may not return. The war, stripped of illusion, becomes an obligation rather than a contest. One staff officer writes privately in the spring of 1945, "We are no longer trying to win. We are trying to endure." Across the ocean, American shipyards remain active, indifferent to the changing psychology of their enemy. New carriers still launch, crews still train. The machinery continues because it was designed to continue, regardless of outcome, regardless of emotion. This is the final asymmetry. Japan's war effort depends on belief, sacrifice, and will. America's depends on systems that function whether belief exists or not. And systems, once set in motion, do not tire. They do not doubt. They do not stop. Section 8. When the mockery finally died. By the summer of 1945, the war has stripped away every remaining illusion. Inside the remnants of Japan's naval command structure, the tone is no longer analytical or defiant. It is clinical. Production tables, once debated, are now accepted as immutable facts. There is no argument left to make against them. The mockery that once accompanied discussions of American shipbuilding feels like something from another lifetime. Before the war, Japanese officers had spoken of American industry as inefficient, unfocused, and fragile. Too dependent on civilian labor, too scattered to sustain a long naval conflict. Those assumptions had shaped Pearl Harbor itself. Cripple the fleet, they believed, and the factories would falter. They never did. What Japanese planners failed to understand was that American shipbuilding was never designed to be elegant. It was designed to be repeatable. Hulls did not need to be masterpieces. They needed to float, fight, and be replaced. Carriers were no longer singular assets. They were outputs of a process. By the end, Japanese intelligence officers no longer tracked individual American ships. There were too many. They tracked rates, launches per month, training throughput, repair turnaround. And every calculation ended the same way. Even if Japan fought perfectly from the beginning, even if Midway had gone differently, even if losses had been minimized, the industrial gap would still have grown wider with each passing year. This is the final realization. The war was lost not when the first bomb fell on Hiroshima, nor when the last carrier sailed, nor when the final order was given. It was lost the moment Japan chose to fight a nation whose strength was not concentrated in fleets, but embedded in factories, schedules, rail lines, and shift rotations. Pearl Harbor had not delayed America. It had awakened it. In the end, the Imperial Japanese Navy did not surrender because it was outmaneuvered in a final battle. It surrendered because it was overtaken by something it could never sink, never bomb, and never exhaust. A system. A system that turned steel into ships faster than courage could turn men into martyrs. And when the numbers finally reached Tokyo, fully, undeniably, and without hope of reversal, the laughter was already gone. Only the arithmetic remained.